Welcome back to the Deep Dive. It is Tuesday, February 10th, 2026.
Hope you're having a good week.
We certainly are, because we have something a little different today.
A bit of a departure for us.
Yeah, exactly. Usually we're deep in the immediate news cycle, the headlines that are right in your face. But today we're taking a step back.
Or maybe a leap forward.
A leap forward, I like that. We're talking about a piece of writing that just dropped yesterday, and it's got us thinking about time.
Right. Not just, clock time.
No, political time. The kind that moves in these, slow, heavy arcs. The kind you don't really notice until it hits you.
It's a fascinating concept. I mean, we get so caught up in the candidate of the moment, the scandal of the week, that we completely miss the weather changing.
The entire climate is shifting, and we're arguing about the forecast for this afternoon.
Exactly.
So the piece we're unpacking is a blog post. It's titled, 4 Megatrends Pointing Toward an AOC Presidency in 2028.
Okay, I know what you're thinking.
Yeah, it's from a blog called Barack Face. And before you roll your eyes at the title or, the political angle, just stick with us.
Please do. Because this really isn't a campaign ad. It's more like a structural analysis of history.
It is. The author is arguing that political eras, they announce themselves before a single ballot is cast.
That's the real hook here. The author, a guy named Paramendra Bhagat, he's basically saying that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, isn't just a politician. He says she's a signal.
A signal? Like a data point.
A data point that indicates the entire operating system of American politics is about to undergo a major reboot.
A reboot is a very polite way of putting it. I mean, the author is suggesting we are looking at a shift as big as 1932.
Or 1980, these huge foundational shifts.
Exactly. But before we get into the heavy machinery of his argument, let's talk about the source itself, Barack Face. And who is this guy, Paramendra Bhagat? Because context it's everything here.
It is. And Bhagat isn't just some random blogger. He establishes his credentials right at the top. He says he was Barack Obama's first full-time volunteer in New York City.
Okay, so that gives him a certain perspective.
A very specific vantage point. He saw the Obama wave when it was still just a ripple. He understands what grassroots momentum actually looks like from the inside.
But it's more than that. I was looking at the sidebar on his blog, and his background is... well, it's incredibly eclectic.
Oh, yeah. He's written novels like The Country of Geniuses, and then nonfiction like AI in Global Education.
And books on global politics, like The Great Subcontinent Uprising. I saw one called Calciism, too.
Right.
I mean, he's got books on AI, economics, spirituality. It reads like the library of someone who is trying to figure out how the entire world works, not just how Washington, D.C. works.
And that futurist perspective, it completely bleeds into this article.
It really does. This does not read like a standard op-ed from the Post or the Times. It reads like a systems analysis.
Precisely. And there's another detail that really jumped out at me. The Post is bilingual.
I saw that. Half of it is in English, and the bottom half is, what, Hindi?
It's in Hindi, yeah. It's a mirror image of the English text.
Yeah.
And I think that's intentional. It reinforces this idea that he's looking at this whole thing through a global lens.
So these trends he's talking about, inequality, technological disruption, they're not just American problems.
He sees them as planetary issues, even if the specific political solution he's talking about here is an American one.
Okay, so let's get into the meat of it, the core thesis. He argues that democratic socialism, which, for the last few decades has been this taboo, scary word on the margins.
The third rail of politics.
Right. He's saying it has migrated from the margins to the mainstream. He compares AOC to FDR in 1932.
That's a huge comparison.
It's massive. He says she is appearing at a moment when the old economic story no longer matches lived reality. That phrase, lived reality, that really stuck with me. It's powerful. It's the gap between what the GDP numbers say and what people feel when they, go to the grocery store or try to pay their rent.
Or look at their student loan balance.
Exactly. Pagat's argument is that the system is, it's still running mechanically, but fewer and fewer people actually believe it works for them.
And when that belief evaporates,
that's when you get a shift. And he breaks this down into 4 specific megatrends. These are the structural pillars that he believes make an AOC presidency in 2028 not just possible, but...
What was the phrase he used? Structurally primed.
Structurally primed. I love that. It implies the stage is already set, the lights are on, and she just has to walk onto it.
So let's unpack these. Megatrend number 1. The author calls it the 50-year pendulum.
This is a theory of political time. The basic idea is that the American political economy, it doesn't move in a straight line.
Right. It's not just progress, progress, progress. No, it moves like a pendulum, swinging back and forth between, say, an emphasis on collective good and an emphasis on individual liberty, between reform and retrenchment. And these swings, he argues, last roughly half a century.
50 years, that's a long time. That's a whole working life for most people.
It is, but look at the history he lays out. He says, start in the 1930s. The Great Depression hits. The old model is shattered.
And the pendulum swings hard to the left.
Hard left. You get Franklin D. Roosevelt and the New Deal. And that wasn't just, a new president. It was a complete restructuring of the relationship between the government, the market, and the citizen.
A new social contract.
Exactly. The characteristics of that era were all about collective solutions. The federal government's role expanded dramatically. You got Social Security, strong labor protections, public housing, eventually the GI Bill.
The underlying philosophy was that government had a duty to provide a baseline of economic security.
It did. And that model, broadly speaking, it held for decades. Bagat argues that's what created the American middle class. It powered this incredible upward mobility.
And he makes the point that even Republican presidents like Eisenhower, they didn't try to dismantle it. They managed it.
Right. Eisenhower built the interstate highway system. He didn't privatize Social Security. The consensus held.
But then the pendulum starts to swing back.
Right around 1980, the election of Ronald Reagan.
The Reagan Revolution.
Bagat identifies this as the beginning of what he calls the neoliberal era. The pendulum swings hard away from government and towards the market. The new philosophy is all about deregulation, privatization, tax cuts for capital.
And the decline of unions?
A steep decline.
Yeah.
The source has this great line about it. He says, in this new era, markets were treated as moral arbiters and government as a necessary evil.
That perfectly captures the vibe of the last, 40-something years.
It's the defining ethos. And the crucial point Bagat makes is that this became a bipartisan consensus. It wasn't just Republicans.
No, he points to Bill Clinton declaring the era of big government is over.
Exactly. So for the better part of 50 years, Democrats just sort of moderated this new reality, and Republicans tried to radicalize it. But the core assumptions, they went almost completely unquestioned.
If you wanted to solve a problem, you used a market-based solution.
Always.
But now we're in 2026. The 50 years are almost up, and the author argues this arc is totally exhausted. The pendulum is ready to swing back. And his question is, why?
It comes down to the results. The lived reality we talked about. He lists what he calls the symptoms of decay that define the end of this cycle.
And it's a grim list.
It is. Wage growth has completely decoupled from productivity.
Which basically means people are working harder and more efficiently, but their paychecks aren't showing it.
Not at all. All that extra value is going to the top. Then he points to massive monopolization in, well, basically every key sector. Tech, finance, healthcare, housing.
And soaring household debt. That's the big one for me. I mean, people are literally borrowing just to maintain the lifestyle their parents could afford on a single salary.
It's the only way to stay afloat. He describes the middle class as being hollowed out from both ends. And this is where the timing becomes critical. Pendulums don't just stop at the extremes. Gravity, or in this case social pressure, pulls them back.
And public patience is just gone.
It's exhausted. Especially, he notes, for voters under 40. They've lived their entire adult lives in this decay phase. They have no memory of a time when this system was supposedly working well.
So, enter AOC.
She represents the reverse swing. The author argues her politics, her entire message, mirrors the early New Deal's moral clarity.
What does he mean by that? Moral clarity?
It's the simple, direct assertion that the economy should serve people, not the other way around. She's basically saying that markets are tools, not gods. And if the tools aren't working, you fix them or you get new ones.
So if 1980 was the year the clock started on the neoliberal era,
then 2028 is the year the clock runs out. The pendulum is at the apex of its swing, and it's about to come rushing back.
it's a really compelling narrative. I mean, it takes the focus off of, do you like her personality on Twitter? And puts it on what time is it in American history.
That's the whole point. It's a structural argument, not a personal one.
Okay, but let's move on to Megatrend number 2, this one. This one is provocative.
This is where he really flexes his analytical muscles, I think.
He calls it reform or rupture, America's Deng Xiaoping moment.
Yeah. This is the section where he draws a comparison that I think might make some listeners a little uncomfortable, but it's historically rigorous. He compares the current state of the U.S., to the Soviet Union and China in the late 20th century.
Okay, let's unpack this slowly. The Soviet Union versus China. What's the lesson the author is drawing here?
The lesson is all about survival. Fagat has this blunt line he writes, "Systems that refuse to reform eventually collapse."
Simple as that.
Simple as that. He argues the Soviet Union didn't just fall because communism's a bad idea.
Yep.
It fell because of staggering inequality, deep-seated corruption, economic stagnation, and what he calls elite capture.
The people running the show were completely out of touch with reality.
Totally. They were living in a different world. So by the time Gorbachev comes along in the 80s and tries to reform things, glasnost, perestroika, it was, in the author's words, too little too late.
The system was too brittle.
It shattered. It couldn't bend, so it broke.
Okay, so that's one path, the rupture path.
Yeah.
And the counterexample is China.
Specifically, Deng Xiaoping in the late 1970s. After Mao, China was also facing a massive crisis of stagnation. The system wasn't working. But Deng chose a completely different path. He embraced pragmatic economic restructuring.
He didn't throw out the whole political system.
No, he preserved the political continuity of the Communist Party, but he completely overhauled the economic engine.
This is where he brings in that famous quote.
It doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white as long as it catches mice.
Right. It's the ultimate statement of pragmatism over ideology.
It is, and Bagat's interpretation of this is crucial. He says that for Deng, reform was not ideological surrender, it was system preservation.
He changed the economy to save the political order.
Deng realized that if the Communist Party wanted to survive, it had to deliver prosperity, had to make life better for people. So he opened up the markets. He saved the system by radically changing how it worked.
So how on earth does this apply to the United States in 2026?
Fagat argues that the U.S. is at that exact same fork in the road right now. We can be the Soviet Union, ignore the warning signs, refuse to change, let the inequality and corruption fester and eventually collapse or break apart. Or we can be Deng Xiaoping. We can undertake major economic reforms to save our democratic structure.
And he paints a pretty bleak picture of our current reality to back that up.
He does. He rattles off the stats. Inequality rivals the Gilded Age. The top 1% now holds more wealth than the entire bottom 90%.
Social mobility has ground to a halt. The American dream is on life support.
Trust in every major institution, government, media, courts, is at historic lows.
And he has that line about polarization, that it's just material insecurity wearing cultural masks.
That is such a profound observation. He's saying we're fighting these vicious culture wars because the economic foundation is rotting beneath our feet. People are scared and angry because their lives are precarious, and that anger gets channeled into cultural battles.
So in this crazy analogy, AOC is Deng Xiaoping.
Huh. Yeah, it's a twist you don't see coming.
I did not.
But in a structural sense, he argues yes. He reframes her entire agenda not as radical revolution, but as preventative maintenance for capitalism.
Preventive maintenance. That's such a different way to look at it.
It is. And he goes through her main policy proposals and points out the historical precedents to show that these aren't some alien concepts cooked up in a lab.
Okay, let's look at those. He mentions a 70% top marginal tax rate. To a lot of people, that sounds huge.
It sounds huge to us because we have lived our entire lives in the Reagan era. But Fagat immediately points out that under Dwight D. Eisenhower, a five-star general, a Republican, the top marginal tax rate was over 90%.
90%.
91, to be exact. And that was during the height of the Cold War and what many would call the golden age of American capitalism and middle-class expansion. So his point is, this isn't radical. It's actually a return to a model that worked before.
Then he brings up Vienna-style social housing. What is that?
It's a reference to the housing model in Vienna, Austria, which is consistently ranked as one of the most livable cities in the world. The city government itself is a massive landlord.
They own a huge chunk of the housing stock.
A huge chunk. The article says about a third of the city lives in some form of publicly owned or subsidized housing. And it's high quality. It's desirable. It's not the failed projects of the past.
And what does that do to the market?
It keeps rents low for everyone. The private market has to compete with this high-quality, affordable public option. Bagat calls this a market-stabilizing alternative to the endless boom and bust cycles we see in American housing.
Okay, and then, of course, single-payer healthcare.
He describes that not as a government takeover, but as removing an inefficiency tax on labor and entrepreneurship. Well, think about it. Right now, if you want to leave your corporate job to start a small business, your biggest fear is losing your health insurance. The current system ties healthcare to employment, which stifles risk-taking.
It's called job lock.
Exactly. With a single-payer system, healthcare is a given. It's just there, like the fire department. It removes that burden from businesses and frees up individuals to be more entrepreneurial.
So the overarching argument here is these policies, they aren't about destroying capitalism. They are about saving it from its own worst excesses.
Precisely. It is Deng logic applied to democracy. The alternative, he warns, is what we're already seeing: entrenched oligarchy and Soviet-style institutional decay.
It's a stark choice when you frame it that way. Reform or rupture.
It's a very stark choice.
Okay, that brings us to Megatrend number 3. And this is where the futurist in him, the guy who writes books about AI, really comes out.
Yeah, this section is called AI, Robotics, and the End of Scarcity.
Now, we've all been hearing about AI for years now, but he frames it in a very specific way. He calls it an inequality engine.
This connects directly to his other work. He starts with the premise that we are accelerating toward what he calls radical abundance.
Radical abundance.
Productivity gains that used to take decades are now happening in a matter of years. And crucially, automation isn't just coming for manual labor on an assembly line. It's coming for cognitive work.
Lawyers, doctors, financial analysts, writers.
All of it. Which sounds great, in theory. Who doesn't want more for less?
Right, who doesn't want abundance?
The problem, he argues, is distribution. He writes, abundance is not inherently equitable. If robots and AI can produce everything we need, but one person owns all the robots and the AI, then that one person gets all the wealth.
And the rest of us get what?
Well, we get destitution, unless something changes.
He makes a comparison to the Industrial Revolution.
It's a powerful parallel. We look back at the Industrial Revolution as this great leap forward for humanity, and in the long run, it was. But in the immediate short term, it created unimaginable misery.
Dickensian slums, child labor, horrific working conditions.
It took decades of struggle and government intervention, labor laws, public schools, the weekend, to turn that raw industrial wealth into a broadly shared, higher standard of living.
And this is where he has this provocative line about the Luddites. We always use Luddite as an insult for someone who hates technology.
Right, some anti-progress crank.
But he says the Luddites were not anti-technology, they were anti-destitution.
That is such a crucial reframing. They didn't hate the new weaving looms. They hated that the looms were taking their jobs and starving their families, with all the profits going to the factory owner.
They were fighting for a share of the new abundance.
They were. And Bagat argues we are facing an almost identical moment. If AI takes millions of jobs and we don't have a new mechanism to distribute the immense wealth that AI creates, we are heading for social disaster.
And this is where AOC's platform comes back into the picture. How does he fit her policy vision into this AI future?
He argues her policies are basically the only ones that make sense in a world that is moving beyond scarcity. Take progressive taxation. In an automated economy, it's about capturing the surplus value generated by the machines. If a robot does the work of 10 people, you tax the robot's output to fund society.
It's a tax on productivity, not just human labor.
Exactly. Then you have universal programs, things like social housing, single-payer health care, maybe a universal basic income. The point of these is to decouple human survival from employment.
That's the key, isn't it? Decoupling survival from having a job. Because if the machines do most of the work, there won't be enough jobs in the traditional sense to go around.
Precisely. Your ability to eat and have a roof over your head shouldn't depend on whether a corporation needs your specific labor for 40 hours a week.
And he also mentions a shift in education.
Yes. Moving away from what he calls credentialism, just getting a degree so you can get a job, toward lifelong capability building.
Learning for its own sake, or to adapt to a changing world.
Right. In an AI-driven world, you'll have to constantly learn new skills. Education has to become a public utility, not a product you buy once.
It's a moral question, too, at the end of the day. He puts it so starkly. He says, in an age where machines can produce abundance, poverty becomes a policy choice.
Oof. That's the bumper sticker for this entire section right there.
It really is.
If we can feed, house, and care for everyone easily with technology and we choose not to, that is an active moral choice we are making as a society.
And he argues that AOC's answer to that moral question, which is that everyone should benefit from progress, is the only stable solution in the long run.
The alternative is a tiny elite living in a techno-utopia and a massive, permanently unemployed underclass with nothing to lose. That is not a stable society. That's the recipe for a revolution.
Okay, so just to recap, we have the historical pendulum swinging left. We have the
Eh,
systemic necessity of reform to avoid rupture. We have the technological pressure of AI forcing a new social contract. But the big question is, can it actually win an election?
right. Can you sell this to voters?
And that brings us to Megatrend number 4. The author calls it the Mamdani effect.
Now, this is where the specific date of the article, February 2026, becomes really important. He points to a very specific person, Zohran Mamdani.
Who, in the reality of this article, is the mayor of New York City.
Correct. The source identifies him as the current mayor of New York, and this is presented as the final piece in the puzzle, the proof of concept.
For listeners who might not know, Zohran Mamdani was a real-life Democratic Socialist State Assembly member from Queens. The idea that he becomes the mayor of the biggest city in the country by 2026 is, well, it's a huge part of this author's argument.
It is absolutely massive. I mean, New York City has an economy larger than many countries. Being mayor of NYC is arguably the second or third most difficult and powerful executive job in America.
And Pagat's point is that a Mamdani victory in mayoralty proves that bold progressive platforms can win real governing mandates, not just protest votes in a single primary.
It's no longer just a theory.
He has this great line. He says, movements normalize before they nationalize.
That's the pattern of American history. Ideas start on the fringe, maybe in a university or a small magazine. Then they take over a city council, then a mayor's office, then a state, and then finally, the country.
And he compares what Mamdani is doing to what Obama did.
It's a fascinating comparison. He says what Obama did for multicultural liberalism, making it the mainstream aspirational face of the nation. Mamdani, in this scenario, is doing for unapologetic economic progressivism.
He's making it seem competent, normal even.
He's making it seem boring in the best way possible. The job of a mayor is to make the subways run and pick up the trash. If a democratic socialist can do that effectively in a city of 8 million people, it demystifies the whole thing.
It's that normalization that's so interesting. He argues that voters are shown to be less afraid of a label like socialism than they are of, getting an eviction notice or $1 million medical bill.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When you're paying half your income in rent for a tiny apartment, you don't really care if the person with a plan to fix it calls themselves a socialist, a capitalist, or a Martian. You just want the problem solved.
And so Pagat argues that a successful Mamdani mayoralty in NYC completely removes the power of socialism as a scare tactic against someone like AOC.
It neuters the attack. The opposition will say, she's a socialist, the economy will collapse, and her side can just point to New York and say, really? Looks okay from here. In fact, they're building housing and expanding healthcare.
It makes AOC's platform look practical and tested, rather than theoretical and risky. That's the big shift.
That's it. In 2020 or even 2024, she might have looked like a gamble to a swing voter. But in 2028, with a successful Mayor Mamdani in City Hall, she looks like a proven model ready for scale.
Okay, so we have these 4 massive trends, and he sees them all converging. The historical cycle, the economic imperative, the technological reality, and now the political proof of concept.
It all comes together in his synthesis section, which he titles A New Deal for a New Century.
And I noticed he circles right back to the capitalism debate here. He really insists that AOC's platform is a correction of capitalism, not a rejection of it.
He's very clear on that point. He even lists things like the interstate highway system, the internet, public universities as great capitalist successes that were, in fact, government-led, high-tax public initiatives.
He's trying to reclaim that legacy, the legacy of public investment creating the conditions for private prosperity.
He is. He's arguing that the version of capitalism we've had for the last 50 years is the aberration, not the norm.
And he ends with a very specific focus on the timeline. He asks, why 2028?
And his answer is, because the pendulum is ready. The old answers from the Reagan era no longer explain the new pain that people are feeling.
When reality becomes undeniable, the system has to change.
He believes we are right at that tipping point.
We skipped over something earlier that I want to circle back to, the bilingual aspect, the Hindi text at the bottom of the post. Why do you think he did that? It's almost a word-for-word translation.
I think it speaks to the author's entire worldview. Paramendra Bhagat isn't just looking at the U.S. in a vacuum. You look at his book titles, The Great Subcontinent Uprising, AI in Global Education. He sees these themes as universal.
So inequality isn't just an American problem.
Not at all. The disruption of AI isn't just happening in Silicon Valley. By publishing this in Hindi as well, He's signaling that this is a conversation for the entire global South, too.
The Deng Xiaoping moment isn't just a lesson for Washington.
It's a lesson for democracies everywhere that are struggling with the failures of neoliberalism. It elevates the blog post from just being a local political prediction to being a global structural analysis.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
And it frames a potential AOC presidency not just as an American event, but as a potential turning point in a global shift away from the economic consensus of the last 50 years.
I think that's exactly his intention.
So we've unpacked the source. We've looked at the pendulum, the black and white cats, the robots, and the mayor of New York. The author closes with this line. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez may not just be running for president, she may be running on time.
That's a mic drop moment right there.
It really is.
It strips away the agency of the individual politician
Yeah.
and places it in the hands of these much larger historical forces.
Mm-hmm.
It suggests that if it wasn't her, it would have to be someone like her.
She just happens to be the person standing in the right place when the historical clock strikes 12.
That's the argument.
It's a fascinating and honestly a kind of calming way to look at politics. It makes you feel a little less anxious about the day-to-day tweets and the cable news scandals.
And a little more focused on the big, slow-moving currents.
That's the value of this kind of deep dive, isn't it? It forces you to zoom out. And when you zoom out, sometimes the chaos starts to reveal a pattern.
It often does.
So here's our question for you, the listener. If this pendulum theory is true, if we really are at the end of a 50-year cycle, what does that mean for the next 50 years?
That is the scary and exciting part of it. Because if 2028 is the start of a new cycle, like 1980 or 1932 was, then the decisions made in the next few years will define the structure of American life all the way until the 2070s.
Just think about that as you go about your week. Is the discomfort we all feel today, the high prices, the political anger, the anxiety about the future, is that just politics as usual? Or is it, as Paramendra Bhagat suggests, the sound of a system that needs urgent preventative maintenance to avoid a total collapse?
And are you seeing these megatrends in your own life? The impact of automation, the disconnect between your productivity and your paycheck, the soaring cost of living. Look around. The signals might be clearer than you think.
Well, thanks for joining us on this trip to 2028 and back to 1932. We will catch you on the next deep dive.
Stay curious.
Wait, one thing before we go, though. I want to circle back to something in the text that I think we kind of glossed over, but now that I'm thinking about it, it feels critical to the whole argument.
Okay, what's that?
The author's very specific emphasis on generational memory. He explicitly says public patience is exhausted, particularly among voters under 40.
Right. The generation that has only known the decay phase of the cycle.
Exactly. And I think that's a vital psychological component of his entire thesis. I mean, if you're, say, 65 or 70 years old in 2026, you remember a time when the Reagan model seemed to be working.
Do you remember the boom of the 80s or the tech bubble of the 90s? You have a baseline nostalgia for that economic operating system, even if it's not working now.
You remember when a summer job could actually pay for a semester of college? Or when buying a house seemed like a normal thing for a young person to do?
Precisely. But if you're 35 in 2026, you were born in 1991, you were a teenager during the 2008 financial crash, you entered the workforce during the rise of the gig economy, you've watched housing and education costs explode while your wages stayed flat.
You have zero nostalgia for the neoliberal consensus.
None. Because it has never, ever delivered for you. For that entire demographic, the promise has always been a lie.
That's a really powerful point. For that group, burning it all down or radical reform doesn't feel like a risk. It feels like the only sane option.
And that's the engine of the pendulum. It's not just abstract historical forces, it's demographics. It's biology. The generation that built and benefited from the old system retires and, frankly, dies off. The generation that was harmed by the old system becomes the new voting majority.
So the pendulum swing is powered by generational turnover.
It is. And Phagat taps right into that. When he says AOC is a signal, he means she is the political avatar of that demographic reality. She looks like them. She talks about their problems. Her policy grievances are their lived daily grievances.
It connects back to the Mamdani effect, too. Zohar Mamdani is a millennial. AOC is a millennial. We're not just seeing an ideological changing of the guard. We're seeing a literal one.
And think about the Deng Xiaoping comparison again in that light. Deng wasn't the young man, but he was responding to the immense pressure of a population that was desperate for change after the chaos of the Cultural Revolution. He realized that the old guard ideology couldn't feed the new generation.
So the resistance to a figure like AOC is, in many ways, a generational clash. You have an older generation saying, but this system works. I saw it work.
And a younger generation saying, show me the receipts, because it's not working for me.
And the receipts, according to Fagat, are the soaring debt, the housing crisis, the climate crisis, the staggering inequality. The data overwhelmingly supports the younger generation's pessimism.
It really does.
You know, looking at the source again, there's another subtle point tucked away in that AI and scarcity section. He mentions education shifting from credentialism to lifelong capability building.
Yes, we touched on that.
That feels like a very direct response to the student debt crisis, which is arguably one of the biggest generational burdens there is.
Absolutely. The current model is completely broken. You take on life-altering amounts of debt to get a credential, a degree that functions as a gatekeeper to a decent job.
A job that might be automated away by AI in 10 years anyway.
It's a terrible value proposition. It's a massive gamble where the house almost always wins, and you, the student, are left holding the bag for 40 years.
Fagat's vision, or his interpretation of AOC's vision, is that education becomes a piece of public infrastructure, like roads or bridges.
I love that comparison. You don't pay a toll every time you drive out of your driveway. You shouldn't have to pay a massive toll every time you want to learn a new skill.
Especially in an AI world where you have to keep learning just to stay relevant.
Human capital as infrastructure, as the phrase he used. It reframes spending on college and vocational training, not as a handout to individuals, but as a strategic public investment in the country's collective brainpower.
It's the same logic as the New Deal. FDR built physical infrastructure like dams and bridges. This New Deal, as he calls it, would build human infrastructure. It's the same philosophy, just updated for the digital age.
It's remarkable how consistent the internal logic of the argument is. Whether he's talking about housing, healthcare, education, or climate, the argument is always the same. The market, left to its own devices, has failed to provide this essential good efficiently or at a price people can afford. Therefore, the public sector must step in to stabilize the foundation so the market can function on top of it.
That is the literal definition of the pendulum swinging. For 50 years, the default answer to every problem was privatize it.
Let the market handle it.
And now the emerging answer seems to be, no, we have to publicize it, or at the very least, we have to guarantee it as a right.
It really makes you wonder about the 2028 election and beyond. If this analysis holds any water, any candidate who runs on a platform of let's just keep doing what we've been doing, maybe with some minor tweaks, they're doomed.
In a change election, the status quo is the most toxic position you can have.
And Fagat is making the case that 2028 isn't just a change election, it's a once-in-a-generation, system-redefining election.
Well, now I think we've really covered it all. From generational divides to the philosophy of education in an AI world, it is a lot to chew on.
It certainly is.
Okay, for real this time, thank you for listening. It's February 10th, 2026. Keep your eyes on that pendulum.
See you next time.